Welcome back to the Career SPARC Plus podcast. I'm Adam. Now, in the last episode, we introduced the SPARC Plus framework. It's 5 pillars for sustainable high performance. And in this episode, we're deep diving into the first of those pillars, strengths. Now, if you're rolling your eyes already thinking this is going to be another Discover Your Gifts pet talk, then stick with me because it's not. What we're actually talking about is how your strengths, if you're not careful, can become the very thing that limits you. But use them right, and they'll deliver you extraordinary results. Let's get into it. Let's start with a story about Andrew. Now, Andrew was brilliant, well-connected, and he had an impeccable reputation. He was also a legend when it came to the numbers, like scary good. Give him a spreadsheet and he'd spot the pattern in the blink of an eye. His analytical mind, a genuine super strength. The problem for Andrew was that he'd become the go-to person for every piece of financial advice in the business. The organisation needed a strategic leader to take on a leaderless business unit, and it wanted Andrew for the role. But instead of flexing his strategic leadership and visionary muscles, he was constantly pulled into the number crunching weeds. And here's the kicker, he was doing it willingly because he was good at it. It felt safe. When you're brilliant at something, it's seductive to keep going back to it. But brilliant at something doesn't necessarily mean it's the best use of you. Now, someone else got that leadership gig, much to Andrew's disappointment, actually. And he wasn't stuck because he lacked the ability. He was stuck because he'd made his strengths his ceiling. Now, let me tell you about Amanda. Also brilliant and professionally very ambitious. A really driven, creative sort. In her free time, she was painting. She'd nearly finished her first fiction novel. A real talent for sort of creating something from nothing, based entirely on her imagination. The problem for Amanda was she worked in an admin role at an insurance company, and she was good at it. A solid sort of 3 out of 5 performer at appraisal time. And it had been that way for coming on to 10 years when we spoke. That stagnation wasn't scratching her ambitious itch. Sometimes that drained her motivation and she'd cut corners or aim for acceptable minimum rather than excellence. It also was giving her the Sunday night blues, you know, the feeling. And friends and family were so familiar with this level of frustration, they'd actually stopped asking her how work was going. Quite kindly, her team organised a little 10-year anniversary party for her, but that wasn't a celebration for Amanda. It just reminded her how long she'd been unhappy. And she wasn't unhappy because the job was inherently bad, or because she was talentless in any way. She was unhappy because she possessed a super strength, but she wasn't in a role that required it. Now, maybe Andrew's story, or perhaps Amanda's, sounds a little bit too uncomfortably familiar. Now let's move on and talk about what we mean by strengths, because this goes way beyond the typical, are you an extrovert or are you an introvert? Or here's a half-day course on presentation skills. Real strengths work is about understanding your natural or innate patterns of brilliance, and then being intentional about deploying them. And to be intentional about them, you have to be aware of them and you have to understand them. Now, this sounds easy on paper, but the reality is that when something is such a well-ingrained pattern and your use of it is as natural as blinking, you cease to be consciously aware of it. Your subconscious runs the pattern for you day to day, leaving your conscious mind to deliberate important questions like what to wear today or what to have for lunch. Creating awareness and understanding is precisely what a Gallup Strengths Assessment does so effectively. Bringing your strengths out of hiding in the depths of your subconscious and placing you back in the driving seat of how and when they're used. That's powerful in terms of creating high performance. And it's why more than 90% of Fortune 500 companies use it to develop their leaders. The words natural and innate are really important here. These strengths aren't learned in a seminar and they're not context dependent. They're part of the fabric of how you see, and handle the world around you. Gallup have shown this by testing and retesting people throughout their careers, and they've observed that while situations and context for the same person can change significantly, their strengths profile remains largely static. Same person, different world, same way of tackling it. Now, strengths aren't just things you're good at. They're patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that energize you and produce consistent results. The Gallup organizations researched this for over 70 years, and they define a strength as the ability to consistently provide near-perfect performance in a specific activity. There's 3 elements that matter here. First is natural talent, the raw wiring you were born with. Second, investment, time and effort spent developing that talent, repetition. Third, energy. It gives you juice rather than drains you. That last one's really critical. You can be competent at something and it can still drain you. That's not a strength. That's a skill you've developed or been told you need to work on, despite your natural wiring. When I found myself working with leopards and cheetahs in Namibia, long story, different podcast, I realised there were fascinating examples for this all around us if we just choose to see them. Think about it. Cheetahs are built for speed, ridiculous speed. But what specialisation comes with is a trade-off. They're very light, with honeycomb structure in their bones. The secret to their speedy success, but it also means they can't stalk like a leopard or scavenge like a hyena, because they lack the strength for the confrontation and the fight. Their strength is their strategy. It's when they lean into this, they survive and thrive. And they do this from day one, and then they keep doing it. They don't submit a request for a scavenger training because they've identified it as a weakness. Their success depends on knowing when to use it and when to walk away. Stepping outside of their strengths-induced strategy is possible, but the risk and the potential consequences of doing so are extremely high, and their chances of success are very low. Likewise, they don't tend to hang out in mountain ranges, much preferring the flat open plains. And why? Because that's the environment where their strengths pay the biggest dividends. And you're the same. Your natural patterns of brilliance are your competitive advantage, but only if you're intentional about deployment and if you're intentional about positioning yourself somewhere where those strengths are valued. Now, here's what older positive psychology thinking sometimes glosses over. Every strength has a shadow. If you're naturally strategic, your shadow may be overthinking and analysis paralysis. If you're naturally empathetic, your shadow might be taking on everyone else's emotional baggage. If you're naturally competitive, your shadow could be crushing collaboration in the pursuit of winning. But here's what's important about that. It doesn't matter too much if you do or do not do those things. You just need to be aware that someone with a different set of strengths, a different way of interpreting the world may label you that way. If I'm a strategic thinker and I witness someone deploying strategic thinking, I may celebrate it and admire how broad and considered their perspective is. But if I'm action orientated and I witness that same person doing their strategic thing, I may label them as a bit abstract and not really results focused. Knowing your strengths and knowing how those strengths can be positively and negatively perceived allows you to more actively manage those perceptions and your professional profile for positive effect. Now, here's something we need to talk about. You're not designed to be perfectly well-rounded. It's a false goal, and it will drive you mad trying to achieve it. And you won't get there. You're designed to be you. Try as you might, you will not turn yourself into an expert at everything. In fact, you'll probably spend an extraordinary amount of effort achieving tiny marginal gains that don't even move the dial in the areas that you're weakest. A right-handed person doesn't wake up in the morning and decide to spend the day writing with their left hand just to try and get better. It's harder, it's slower, the outcome is suboptimal, and it's never going to reach the standards of a natural left-hander anyway. It just represents time and energy taken away from you maximizing the benefits of the things that you are good at. So why do we do the equivalent of that professionally? Identify a weakness, book a training course. Now, for some, the response to this is, well, I have to because my job requires it. Every appraisal, every 360 feedback scores me as average and says I need to improve X, Y, and Z. Or remember the cheetahs deliberately not living in mountains. If you're in a role where your strengths aren't why you're valued, where what makes you brilliant isn't what's being asked of you, the problem's not your strengths. And it's actually not the role either. You're just living in the wrong environment. An environment that won't allow you to flourish and where the perception of your performance isn't likely to get past average. Real self-awareness isn't about fixing your weaknesses. It's about knowing your natural patterns so clearly that you can build around them strategically. Right, so what to do with all of this? Knowing your strengths is pointless if you don't have anything to do with the information. Here's what actually matters. Number one, audit where you spend your time. And I want you to try this. Track your calendar for a week. Not what you wish it looked like, what it actually is. And then score each activity. Green means it energizes me, and I'm excellent at it. That's a strength, that's positive impact. Amber would be competent, but draining. That's a learned skill, natural at best. Red, neither energizing nor excellent. That's a weakness, and that's having a negative impact. If you're spending more than 20% of your time in the red zone, something needs to change. If you're spending less than 50% of your time in the green zone, you're underutilizing your competitive advantage. Number two, name your shadows. For each of your top 3 strengths, identify the shadow side, or how that might be perceived by someone who sees the world differently. What happens when you overplay this strength? When does it stop serving you? And when does it damage the relationship with others or the results that you get? And write that down. Be brutally honest. And then share it with someone that you trust. The one friend who always tells you how it is. And ask them how it shows up. Create the awareness. And number 3, create some guardrails. Once you know your shadows, you can build systems to catch them before they catch you. If your strength is action orientation, but your shadow is not thinking things through, build in a mandatory 24-hour pause before major decisions. If your strength is harmony, but your shadow is conflict avoidance, schedule difficult conversations rather than waiting for you to feel comfortable about it. You can't eliminate the shadows, and that's not the goal, or control other people's perceptions, but you can manage it all. Okay, let's digest that for a bit. And while we do, let me share something about Carol Dweck's work on mindset. Most people know her for the growth versus fixed mindset research, but there's a deeper application to strengths. In some of her studies, she found that people who view their abilities as fixed traits are more likely to avoid challenges that might expose weaknesses. But here's the bit that matters for us. Even with a growth mindset, high performers can fall into what I call strengths addiction. They keep doubling down on what they're already good at because it feels good and it delivers results. But actually the key is more subtle. It's about being intentional because you have accessed that next level of self-awareness, not just doing the same thing over and over. I see this constantly in coaching. A leader with exceptional strategic thinking will try to strategize their way through an emotional team conflict, when what's actually needed is empathy and human connection. A naturally collaborative person will seek consensus on a decision that needs swift and decisive action. We reach for our favorite tools, like an ice cream, even when the situation demands hot coffee. It's worth thinking about. Where are you using a strength just because you can, or because you haven't thought about it? Not because you've thought about it and decided that you should. And what's the cost of that choice? Okay, let's bring us back to where we started. Your job isn't to become good at everything. It's to become brilliant at what you're naturally wired for. Surround yourself with people who are brilliant at what you're not, in an environment that appreciates your superpowers, and then get the hell out of your own way. Stop trying to fix yourself. Start designing around yourself. Andrew, the guy I told you about at the start, once leaders like him accept that their analytical strength is becoming their limitation, everything shifts. They hire senior analysts. They delegate the deep financial modeling. They free themselves up to do the strategic work only they can do, because that leads them to the outcome they want. And you know what happens? They become more valuable, not less valuable, because they're finally operating at the level they were hired for. And Amanda, she needed to get honest about the environment she was in. Once she accepted that no amount of effort was going to make the admin role fulfill her creative strengths, she could start designing her career around what energized her, whether that's different role, a side project, or complete reinvention. That's what happens when you stop clinging to your strengths out of fear and start deploying them intentionally and strategically. Here's this episode's challenge. Think of a recent project or situation where you delivered strong results, and now answer these questions. Number 1, which of your natural strengths, not skills, did you deploy? Number 2, what energized you during the work? Number 3, where did you overplay a strength and what problem did it create? And number 4, what would have been better delegated or done differently? And again, write those things down. Yeah, actually write it down. The articulating of it in written form helps with the clarity. And then ask someone who worked with you on that particular project to give their perspective. Their outside view will show you things about yourself and show you how different people perceive things differently. In the next episode, we're diving into the second pillar, and that's performance. And we're going to talk about delivering impact without creating exhaustion. It's about systems over pure willpower. So there we go. If you found this useful, you know what to do. Subscribe to the Career SPARC Plus podcast so you don't miss the next episode. You can also read the written version in my LinkedIn newsletter, also called the Career SPARC. Search for Adam Pacey on LinkedIn, connect with me, and you'll find the newsletter that way. Now, if you're thinking about how to leverage your strengths more strategically after today, during your career and your leadership journey, then we should talk. A free discovery call is just a LinkedIn DM away. And that just leaves me to say, I'm Adam. This is the Career SPARC Plus podcast. Have a fabulous, fabulous week. Make sure you do those exercises, and I'll see you in the next one.